Oh, hi there. I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. What a wonderful trip this has been. Bitcoin at $1, 2011. Right here in Keiser Report, we told you to buy it. It was going to compete with gold. It's going to take over the world. It was, in fact, perfect money and still is and will forevermore be. Well, let's see how this is working out. Stacy.
So, we were right. Jamie Dimon was wrong. And yet, Jamie Dimon's the guy who gets paid $1 billion to be wrong all the time. That's kind of how why the economy is in a crisis, is that these people who are wrong all the time keep on getting elevated to higher and higher positions, and they get rewarded and celebrated as heroes. Jamie Dimon hated Bitcoin at $10 when we talked about it. He hated it at 100. He hated it at 1,000. And well, he loves it at 13,000. To show you how this has worked, I'm going to show you a 2014 headline from RT. JP Morgan Chase CEO denounces Bitcoin as terrible, predicts its downfall. In the article, he says it's a terrible store of value. It could be replicated over and over. It doesn't have the standing of a government. That was when $750 Bitcoin was in the news. So he was saying it was a terrible store of value. $12,000 later, his bank is pushing in. We'll get into that headline.
Right. Well, he's not alone in being 100% wrong about Bitcoin. There's Nouriel Roubini, Paul Krugman, Peter Schiff, and there's the whole list. Stiglitz, another Nobel-winning incorrect call on Bitcoin. And there's a huge and long list because for the reasons that we said it was going to take over the global economy, those reasons have now been accepted more and more by the global population. Jamie Dimon is a guy who he is defending the status quo. He is part of that front line to keep real price discovery and real money out of the system. He's a protector of fiat money and all the fake price discovery that goes with it, and all of the financing of wars and corruption that goes with it, all the nickel and diming and failure to perform even basic banking skills that go with it, the ability to pay off the billions and tens of billions of dollars of fines he's been levied because of his law breaking, his recidivist law breaking over and over again. And now his day is just about over. I suspect he'll be retiring in the next 6 to 12 months because out of utter disgust and shame, he really needs to just leave.
So they were fined $37 billion over the past 10 years since Keiser Report has been on air. And we've focused, of course, in that time on the crimes they were committing, like the rigging of the precious metals markets. We were talking about it in 2014. In this article, he does also point out, he's quoted as saying that, only criminals use Bitcoin. At that time, we were discussing and pointing out the evidence that there could be some manipulation of the precious metals markets by JP Morgan. We had experts on who were pointing that out. And of course, it was only in 2020, 6 years later, that the Department of Justice were actually building a RICO case against them, a racketeering mafia-like case against them, and they settled and got to get away with that. But in the meantime, here, 2020, after they went up against us, they came up against us using their orthodox thinking, using their white ivory tower sort of thinking, their status quo thinking, and that they believe all the media hype around them. He believes the headlines when he's put on The Economist magazine or one of these big influential magazines, the Financial Times, and told he saves the world. Well, he believed that. We're lucky in that we don't have that. We have heterodox thinkers on our show. We try to look at a contrarian view of what is actually going on in markets. So now 2020, there's no choice for him. The lies have just become so huge, the denial of what Bitcoin was. And we have this headline: for years, JP Morgan was skeptical of Bitcoin. Now the bank's analysts say its value could triple, challenging gold. Okay, we said that years ago here. And now they're analysts who get paid a whole bunch of money to just look at Keiser Report and repackage our content into a report that they charge their investors tens of thousands of dollars, when they're saying, oh, it appears that millennials like Bitcoin better than gold.
Well, they're capitulating. So throughout the whole 6, 7, 8 years that they've been down, bashing Bitcoin, you have to understand that's just deferred purchase, right? They will be forced to buy it eventually, just like Peter Schiff will, and Paul Krugman, and Nouriel Roubini, and every Bitcoin basher will be forced to buy Bitcoin at some point because fiat money is collapsing and the world is going from deglobalization to extreme localism. And the only way that can work is with the hardest money and the perfect money, and that's with Bitcoin. So if they want to live on planet Earth and continue to live on planet Earth, they will have to buy Bitcoin. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. And the only question is, at what price do they get in? Will it be 100,000, 200,000, 400,000? I suspect Peter Schiff will capitulate at 50,000. Paul Krugman will probably capitulate at around 100,000. Joseph Stiglitz, he'll probably capitulate at 250,000. But all the dominoes will fall. I am 100%, I guarantee that this is 100% truth. 100% capitulation. Every Bitcoin basher since 2009 will be going 90 to 100% Bitcoin in the next 18 to 36 months. I guarantee it.
And another important thing about this is it's the importance of doing your own research. Listen to the orthodox status quo ivory tower sorts, take in their advice and listen to what they say, and then listen to somebody like Keiser Report, where we try not to be too status quo promoting and look at alternatives. And so obviously we were right. I mean, at the time, his daughter, I think her name is Laura, was famous for buying Bitcoin at that time. She obviously watched Keiser Report and bought Bitcoin because of us.
Right, and add Warren Buffett to that list, he'll capitulate as well.
I mean, there are different layers of sort of investors, institutional investors. So like when Bitcoin hits 20,000 and takes out its old all-time high, you'll see a whole bunch of more conservative passive investment money coming into the sector, partly because that's the way they have to do it. They have to wait to a certain price, a certain size, a certain market cap. So that's part of the reason why you're never going to get like edgy first mover advantage working with somebody like JP Morgan. Although I have to say Fidelity, which is a huge conservative bank, they were very early in on Bitcoin. And in 2014, when Jamie Dimon was spouting out that this was a terrible investment and a terrible store of value. In fact, Fidelity, which is a privately owned bank, it's not publicly owned.
Because Abigail's a visionary.
Abigail Johnson is the CEO of that company, and she allowed it to happen.
Right, because she had the intellectual capacity to allow the protocol to stimulate her in ways that got Fidelity involved in a major way. She's a underrated major player in this space. People talk about Michael Saylor. They talk about Jack Dorsey over at Square. Abigail Johnson is actually the first major corporate executive to go long Bitcoin of anybody in a huge way. Not only that, they went into mining.
Yeah, Bitcoin mining. But you have to also put that into the context of the time, her cohorts, her competitors, and what the government of the United States was saying at that time. At that time, they were also agreeing with Jamie Dimon, and Jamie Dimon can't think for himself. He just says what the government is going to say, and okay, it's for terrorists, it's for bad guys, and it's evil, don't use it. Within that context is how she stood out amongst all her peers and her competitors to move Fidelity into Bitcoin mining and loads of research.
Right, a quick word about how rising prices would increase rising prices, and that would boil down to asset allocation. So there's about $100 trillion floating in the investment market around the world. And you've got the money managers who are guardians of that $100 trillion have to usually go by guidance suggested by asset allocation. So they've got stocks, bonds, property, commodities, and they've been allocating to some small degree on a microscopic scale, really, Bitcoin. But as the market value of Bitcoin now hits $500 billion and then $1 trillion and then several trillion, it'll essentially show up as an asset class comparable to precious metals. And then that $100 trillion by the fiduciary responsibility by legal statute, they must allocate to take advantage of the total investment opportunities globally. And so that right there what triggers another multi-trillion-dollar rise in the asset, in this case, Bitcoin.
Yeah, and let's tie those two together in a final chart and a quote from that JP Morgan piece, because they said that the older cohorts, i.e. boomers and above, prefer gold, while the younger cohorts prefer Bitcoin as an alternative currency, said the JP Morgan research note. You know, part of what we've been seeing over the past 10, 20 years, 11 years of us doing Keiser Report, as we said, this intergenerational fourth turning situation of the boomers who created this amazing scheme for themselves. You have to give them credit. In 1971, when they were first coming of age, they untethered the dollar from any semblance of wealth creation, and they got to be first in on a pyramid scheme. It's a pyramid scheme, and we all know that, and they're lucky that they got to be the first ones in. However, as that disintegrates, and deglobalization starts because of also the Thucydides trap, and that's happening so fast because of the policies that the boomers themselves, like Clinton and all his financial advisors like Robert Rubin and Larry Summers, they set in motion the Thucydides trap whereby China would be able to rise so fast. So there's a lot of turmoil that, you know, this election won't decide, but it's only going to continue to accelerate because it's already set in motion and you can't stop it. So that is usually the time when you go into gold. So here's a chart to say, like, well, let's look at what gold versus Bitcoin are doing. Well, gold has not provided a hedge against recent equity volatility. Bitcoin, meanwhile, has crushed it. And that would go with the volatility is being caused by the collapse of the boomer and their rule of how they ruled the world and the financial system. That is what's disintegrating. So it makes sense that gold would not respond. It would go down with them, whereas Bitcoin is the rise of the millennial and Generation Z and these generations coming up of what they're going to inherit the world. And it sounds like they might have a positive impact.
Right, and people know about program trading and automatic trading, artificial intelligence. As Bitcoin's relative strength against gold keeps extending for a greater duration and at a greater amplitude, the program traders and the computer traders will allocate more. There'll be more asset allocation on a relative strength basis. And that'll be done without any human being even making a move. It'll just be done by the computers.
Yeah, but that's the status quo. And that's what JP Morgan and Jamie Dimon were listening to. We were out in the streets looking at the people in the Arab uprising, at the indignados, at the global insurrection against bankster occupation. So we were seeing this, and this is why we told you back in 2011 that Bitcoin was the new gold.
We said it was the currency of resistance, Bitcoin. We said that in 2011, and it would be funding the global insurrection against banker occupation. And word banker, that means Jamie Dimon, who will be out of a job soon. Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, much more coming your way. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to return to our conversation with Dan Collins, entrepreneur extraordinaire. He was living in China for 20 years, became an expert, been on the show many times, wrote the China Money Report. Welcome back, Dan.
Hey, Max.
I wanted to pick up where we left off, talking about Ant Financial. It's set to be the biggest IPO in history. Chinese financial media. It's connected to Jack Ma, of course, of Alibaba fame. And you mentioned the statistic there about in terms of the volume of business they expect to do. And I think you mentioned 80 million enterprises or businesses would be hooked up day one to Ant Financial. Contrast that with JP Morgan. They did a story that just came out that they want to compete with Square. So they're going to launch a card similar to Square for payments, and when it launches, they hope to have all of 2,000 customers. Wow, whoop-de-doo. So anyway, let's talk about Ant Financial some more. It seems like this is in keeping with the theme that China is at just a different, whole nother level right now, and it wasn't COVID that did it. It's been going on for years, and so give us talk more about Ant Financial. It's fascinating.
The payment system and Ant Financial is very important as we talk to e-commerce, right? We're moving into the world of e-commerce. China today, their e-commerce is about 2-3 times literally what the United States is for e-commerce. A lot of that's been developed by Ant Financial. They came out of Alibaba. Ant Financial is connecting 80 million merchants, 16 trillion in transactions last year. That's 25 times bigger than PayPal. More importantly, it's almost frictionless e-commerce. So they charge 0.01% on payments. You know, compare that to what you're charging on credit cards here in the United States. Or if you want to, Alibaba, you know, Ant Financial's moved into loans. So very low cost loans over here. We have interest rate apartheid, credit card rates at all-time highs. Ant Financial is creating a economic and financial system for the people. That's what they're kind of focused on, creating that space where banks have completely failed miserably. While they're going around, we saw recently at Goldman Sachs a $3 billion fine for ripping off the Malaysian sovereign wealth fund. JP Morgan has $25 billion in fines from 2011 to 2014. You name it, LIBOR rigging, hiding losses, fraud around toxic mortgages. And then everybody's favorite, manipulating the precious metals market, right? That came out this year. That's almost $1 billion fine. So while Ant Financial has been creating the new financial and tech space, our banks have been going around ripping people off. They're cannibals. They're like, if you look, I encourage the listeners to just Google JP Morgan list of the fines. It's like a rap sheet for a serial killer. I mean, anyone looks at this, how are these people still allowed to do business? They should be shut down. Well, that's what concerns me is that's what we know previously. What's going on now? What's going to go on the next 10 years as we go into this system? How much fraud is going to happen with these dinosaur banks in the US? So Ant Financial is kind of the model, just like Huawei. We kind of wake up, whoa, what's China doing? They have leapfrogged us technically. They've leapfrogged us in infrastructure. Ant Financial is now doing it in the financial space. It's going to be the largest IPO that's ever been seen. It's going to be worth $500 billion by next year. So, yeah, I mean, what's going on there? Watch that space. As you mentioned, we've been talking about it for years.
Now, you bring up an excellent point that, I think needs to be fleshed out a little bit here. So we're told often that financial crime is a victimless crime, that when Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan are caught breaking the law, they pay a fine, and that should be sufficient. Eric Holder under Barack Obama restructured the judicial system in America, created a class of protected bankers that were above the law and by decree. And of course, that money printing that the US has done has masked the deleterious impact of having runaway fraud and runaway looting. Stacy Herbert will often quote the famous Basquiat quote of, when looting became a way of life, it trickles down and becomes a permanent structural feature of your economy. So now we're seeing the victims of this. By allowing these banks to escape any penalty for 10, 15 years now, we have allowed China to leapfrog with Ant Financial and everything else that comes with it to become the dominant superpower in the world. It's not, again, it's an empire, the U.S. empire, committing suicide. It's not that China is being aggressively trying to take over the world. They're becoming the dominant superpower by default because America has abdicated. They've walked away from the table. They stopped competing. They relied on money printing. And speaking of money printing, the IMF calling for a new Bretton Woods. So IMF, it's a vestige of America and the Federal Reserve and the New York Fed. It's just a money printing catastrophe. This new Bretton Woods, they're waking up to the fact, oh my God, we're about to lose to China. So what will be the result of this new Bretton Woods? Will China laugh and just say, well, we've been buying gold for 20 years and we think we have enough gold to support our economy. We don't care what you do? Or will they seek a seat at the table? Or what's the dynamic there, Dan?
Good question. And we're living through historical times, right? A new Bretton Woods. The money, what's more concerning to me is there looks like there's no stop to endless money printing in the West. Europe, US, there is no base case where we get out of money printing. Most of the non-Chinese world has been sucked into 0% interest rates. US is the last one standing that hasn't been sucked there, but they're on their way. I think most people are predicting that we're going to hit 0% interest rates as well. The payments to get out of this COVID crisis, which has been boggled in the West, is just going to continue to go leaps and bounds. What China will demand at a Bretton Woods is, we've talked about this year, we talked about it, the rise of the RMB, the petro-yuan, the oil flows are now mainly to China. They're getting put into RMB. The RMB is increasing fast now. It's back up to 6.7 or so. The RMB is gaining against every currency in the world. I think eventually the China has seen reason, and they're going to make the RMB a equal partner in the world to the dollar and the euro. And eventually people are going to move to it because your telecom network's Chinese, your electrical grid's going to be Chinese, your financial system's going to be Chinese, because as you mentioned, we've abdicated. We don't have it anymore. GE doesn't build power plants anymore. They trade Eastern European loans. The banks just go around manipulating markets. They haven't created technical platforms to create frictionless e-commerce in the United States. We have a few standouts. We have, your Bezoses and your Elon Musk. Without, a guy like Elon Musk, we still would be in the combustion engine trying to be eating our lunch in electrical cars. So, we need to step back and look at that. We are getting replaced technically, financially. It's going to bleed into the military. So that's a whole nother topic we could talk about. But I would say today, U.S. has lost military supremacy in the South China Sea, East China Sea. That will go global over the next 10 years. We've talked about that a little bit on the show before. But where this ends up, how to even get out of the money printing in the U.S., there's no clear path how we can even escape it at this point.
And it's not like this is unknown for people around the world. We recently covered a poll which found most people in developed economies see China as the #1 economic power, including Germany, where just 15% saw the U.S. as #1. And, so this is an emerging story that nobody in the U.S. wants to talk about on cable news. It's MSNBC, Fox News, et cetera. This is not a story because they're busy covering the salacious bedroom antics of the oligarchs and their friends around the world. It's quite sad. So let's move on. Let's just, forget about the U.S. It's now a has-been country. Let's talk about the real stuff happening in the real country of China. What's the latest on the Belt and Road Initiative? How's that going?
The Belt and Road has just continued unabated. As you know, we talked before, it's basically a global, it's basically a new lend for lease across a lot of the developing world, especially Central Asia. It ends in Serbia. You talked about countries looking at China as a leader. Go talk to East Europe. China runs the 16 plus 1. They own the ports in Greece. They're building highways in Montenegro. China's going with one belt, not only across land, but across sea. There's been a lot of, and a lot of it's Western propaganda that's put against them, that you're falling into a Chinese debt trap. But, the developing world is looking at this going, okay, but I'm getting ports, I'm getting electrical grids, I'm getting roads. What are you offering? The U.S. isn't around. We can't build infrastructure in our own country, let alone go out there and build infrastructure in their countries. And China's coming to the table with money, know-how, engineers, labor, workers, and we're going to try to build a NATO in Asia against China, but the rest of the world is going to, make the decision. What's China going to offer me and what's the U.S. going to offer me? This is part of the new Cold War of Thucydides trap that we've talked about before.
Right. So let's play a game here. You now lead America, and you've got to deal with the China situation. What would your policies be?
I'd go through sector by sector. I think one of our weaknesses has become our government leadership. All right. These are not smart people. These are not well-informed people. Many of our institutions have failed us. We need to, we need to look at, I would keep a lot of the duties on China just to level the playing field against mercantilist economies. I would bring back manufacturing. That's at its core. The fourth industrial revolution is happening, which we're not even a player. That's networks, factories, high tech, 3D printing. We've got to go back to having our individual R&D labs. So if you want a money print, let's go money print and create national R&D labs like we used to have the Bell Labs, and let's do pure R&D. We have to get around the accounting system. We have to look at, we treat fixed asset investments like chip plants as a curse on our balance sheets, right? Chinese subsidize chip plants, we subsidize sports stadiums. Okay, so there needs to be a whole cultural shift back. We need real education. We throw money at things and we think that fixes the problem. It doesn't. So we throw money at healthcare, costs go off the charts. We throw money at education, higher education costs goes off the chart. We need real practical approaches. We need to step away from ideologies of the left and right. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We need to go around the world, see what works, and try to recreate our system. Our tax system's archaic. We tax productivity, not consumption. We're basically a consumption economy at this point. So if you want money, tax that. You got to get the financial books in order of the country. But once you bring jobs back, everything else will take care of itself. All the social problems will start to go away. and the country can be rebuilt. But we have to recognize we have a problem. Our our economists in this country are an absolute failure. For 30 years, they've talked about, pretending they know something while they sit and look at industrial belt cities just rot away.
Right.
We'll take a look at
the whole leadership is like Soviet Union in the 50s and 60s. They're all 70, 80 years old, been there for decades, and don't know what's going on. And then it collapsed. So we're at a pre-Soviet Union collapse. Clock is ticking. Dan Collins for president. You got my vote. And after this show, you're going to get probably 5 or 6 more votes. Congratulations. Thanks for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max.
Right, and that's going to do it for this episode of Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I want to thank our guest, Dan Collins, entrepreneur extraordinaire. Until next time, bye, y'all.